And so, my boys, we and girls, we are live. We are live. Welcome back, everybody. Back from vacation, feeling great. Oh, and we've got a doozy on today. Chapter 32, Hypnotism, of Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. This is a very special chapter. We're going to get a lot of girl. Sorry, I just saw Tyler. Girls in the chat. maybe, maybe in the future, maybe in the past. Who knows? What is a woman? Let's find out. And so, my boy, if you want to read along, either now, live, or in the future, please feel free to do so. You can go to this site here, gurdjieff.thework. You can scroll right to the bottom, and they'll have in their library section in primary text, they'll have the PDF I'm using. Thank you for watching and tuning in. Please subscribe, like, donate, send me money, buy a hat. Anyway, let's just jump into it. So, 32 Hypnotism. And so, Beelzebub continued. At this sixth sojourn of mine, in person, on the surface of the planet Earth of yours, I decided to settle there for a long stay and to become a professional physician there. So Beelzebub is spending in his spaceship, and he wants to continue trolling, not really trolling humans. He just wants to hang out. He just wants to hang out, bro. But this time he's not going to be a bum. He's got a proper job. I did indeed become one, only not such a physician as most of them are there, but I chose for myself the profession of what is called their physician hypnotist. So he became a hypnotist. This is interesting because this also constates with my conspiracy theory that Beelzebub in this story is in fact Gurdjieff, and his sojourns down to Earth is just his travels all around the place and all the different jobs he had. Because, like, Gurdjieff was an interesting guy. He was also like the polar opposite to Crowley in some ways. Like, Crowley always was tight for cash, wanting to, get people to sponsor him, whereas Gurdjieff was the Sigma grinder, octillionaire grind set, just, entrepreneur, just starting businesses, flipping business here, just going there, starting this thing. So Gurdjieff, like, was really crafty and always had means. And so the fact that he'd just go to a place and just be like, yeah, I'm a physician now, and then just start doing hypnotism does not surprise me. So I became such a professional there, firstly because during recent centuries, only such physician, oh my god, once again, it's the normal words that mess me up. Physician professionals there obtain an entry to all their classes or castes of which I spoke, and since they enjoy great confidence and authority, ordinary beings are disposed to a sincerity towards them that permits them to penetrate, as is said, their inner world. Hold on a second. What the hell is he saying here? Oh, sorry, we got a mercenary in the chat, Dylan. Hardcore. A general contractor, nice. You got to get independent, start your own business, bro. Be independent and then do magic on the side. So he says, I became such a professional. Firstly, during centuries, only such physician professionals there obtained an entry to all their classes. Okay, so the whole thing, the reason why he chose this profession is because he wanted to mingle with all the different classes, and this profession is the only one that was able to do that. Of which I spoke, since they enjoy great confidence or authority, ordinary beings are disposed to a sincerity towards them. Okay, and so they always talk to their doctors and tell them their most interesting things. It's like, yeah, I was just feeling sick also. I can't seem to get it up anymore. Too much information, but he wants the information. He wants the data. He wants everything. Okay, that makes sense now. So, secondly, I decided to become such a professional in order also, parallel with the attainments of my personal aims, to have the possibility at the same time of giving genuine medical assistance to certain of these unfortunates. So we read in the previous chapter how, like, A lot of the physicians or pharmacists are just basically just trolls, just given placebos to people and don't really heal people. So he was like, you know what? I'll become a fake physician, and then I'll really heal people. That's what his aim was. Indeed, my boy. On the continents there, among all beings, to whatever class they may belong, there has been during recent times, and there still is, a great need for just such physicians. Martial esotericist in the chat. Sorry I'm late. I was applying for a job, lol. Good. Good. I hope you get it, bro. I hope you get it. I may say that I already had a very wide experience in this speciality, having during my previous elucidation of certain subtle points of the psyche of individual favourites of many of yours, many times had recourse to methods there by such a physician, and we got hearts in the chat. Thank you, boys, or possibly my wife tuning in all the way from Sydney. Hey, honey, I love you. I must tell you that formerly your favorites, like all the other three-brained beings of the whole universe, were without that particular psychic property which permits them to be brought into what is called a hypnotic state. To get into that state became proper to your favorites thanks to a certain combination obtained in their psyche and derived from this harmony of the functioning of their common presence. So that's interesting. So normal beings throughout the universe are actually immune to hypnosis, and it only works in us because of our peculiar psyche. What have we got in the chat? Let me actually just move some screens around so I can... Oh my god, that was the wrong screen to move! Good to see you, dude. Hey, many thanks, Mr. Ruak. And Tyler. Girls in the chat confirms. Dave on the dance floor. Instead of veggie tails, it's damn straight. Damn straight. Now, let's get in on it. I must tell you that formerly your favorites... Ooh, have we got a little drop there? Oh no, okay, we're back. We're back. I must tell you that formerly your favorites, like all the other three-brained beings of the whole universe, were without that particular psychic property which permits them to... Oh, yeah, sorry, I already read that. I think we're getting a little choppy frame rate here. YouTube is not receiving enough video smoothing. Open widget? Oh. How do I change the stream health? Maybe I gotta change my settings in OBS. We'll see. I'll just keep going. Oh god, it keeps dropping into poor. Stream's frame rate. We recommend that you use the frame rate 250. I haven't... See, this... Oh, looks smooth now, says Tyler. Okay, well, I'll just keep going. Maybe I'll put this up just to ignore. I'll ignore the thing saying it's gone choppy. This strange psychic property had its rise soon after the destruction of Atlantis. Okay, so before Atlantis, and in Atlantis, we were still immune to hypnosis. But it's after the destruction we were able to be hypnotized. And began to become finally fixed in the presence of every one of them from the time when their zoostat, okay, new word there, let's see what this means. That is, the functioning of their being consciousness began to be divided in two, and when two entirely different consciousnesses, having nothing in common with each other, were gradually formed in them, namely those two different consciousnesses, the first of which is simply called consciousness, and the second, when they finally noticed it in themselves, was called, and still continues to be called, subconsciousness, or unconsciousness nowadays. I think there's like in the field, they don't like using subconsciousness, because it's like, what's the phrase, topological, or it makes it seem like there's an architectural structure. They like unconsciousness better, as if it's like a map. And almost like a video game map where you just have the consciousness and your line of sight, and then there's just this black distance, and anything, there's a fog of war. That's your unconsciousness, and anything can come out of the fog of war. You never know. Maybe memories, maybe something else. Dylan, blessing the streams with prayer. Thank you, Dylan. May it remain smooth. Okay. Let's keep going. If you try clearly to represent to yourself, to transubstantiate in the corresponding parts of your common presence, all I'm about to explain to you will perhaps then thoroughly understand nearly half of all the causes why the psyche of the three-brained beings who have taken your fancy and who breed on the planet Earth has finally become such a unique phenomenon. So, so we have our consciousness, and then there's another part of our consciousness which we're not conscious of. But it is a part of us nonetheless. And because we're not conscious of it, but it's still alive, it moves and goes through processes, and because we're away from it so much, it's almost as if it's another being entirely. So there's two of us, the conscious part and the subconscious silent part of us. It's really interesting. In modern times, actually, when Gurdjieff was stomping around, that science was developed, that coming into modern times. Before then, we had Copernicus with the Copernican revolution in physics, and then there was Darwin with the biological revolution, and then Freud with psychoanalysis and his study of the consciousness. That's where we get words like ego and subconsciousness from. But also, there's another science that developed simultaneously. And it's nowhere near as popular or as well known. Like psychoanalysis and Freud got into the mainstream. It's used by marketing professionals, through Freud and Jung and, the academy. Everyone wants to be a psychologist nowadays, or a pseudo-psychologist. But there's another science called phenomenology, started by Edmund Husserl. Phenomenology studies the consciousness in and of itself, whereas psychoanalysis aims to study the subconsciousness. And the interesting thing about phenomenology is what you're trying to do is bracket away all your subconscious elements so that you just see purely. And it's really interesting because people on the same page were people like William James, his psychological works, and also his religious stuff. Like he's trying to really get to the bottom of religious and mystical experiences. And then people like Henri Bergson, and even people, not Ludwig Wittgenstein, but late Wittgenstein, basically two different people, all kind of have this phenomenological bent. And it's important to go through that, because if you try to study the subconsciousness first, it's like, how do you do that? Well, Freud has this kind of method, Jung has this method, but if you don't, or maybe there's a kind of process you have to go through, because your own subjective elements can interfere with your analysis of your own subconsciousness, and you can kind of make wrong turns and wrong assumptions, hence why everyone makes fun of Freud for all of these weird things. But he has some interesting points. Death drive, the erotic drive, and all of those kind of stuff. They're the Thanatos and Eros. It's, there's some interesting things there, but, he makes some general claims which may not be true. And why? Because he himself had subjective assumptions which were not analyzed properly. So it's like, there's a complete science, but you need to fuse phenomenology and psychoanalysis together to get it. And Gurdjieff has that in a sense. Edmund Husserl and Gurdjieff, Husserl basically has self-observation. He just doesn't have self-remembering in his in phenomenology. Self-observation. You bracket everything and you observe everything, and you suspend your natural reaction. And Edmund Husserl has all these ideas, but I think when he got to maybe you can bracket the consciousness itself, everyone was just like, no, Husserl's crazy. You're not allowed to go that far. And so the academy stopped him from going full esoteric. But there are esoteric elements in phenomenology, and they've been smuggled in through Husserl. So that's one thing I'd like to study one day properly. I'd like to study Husserl properly. Marshall Esther says, Freud was right about many things. It's a shame that his reputation is tarnished by modern psychologists. Yeah, exactly. Even modern neuroscience is starting to prove Freud correctly. Spicy. But yeah, this is the whole kind of thing. It's like, we need to study that part of us that's invisible, but we also need to understand the part that's still visible. So those two things together actually make a bit of something complete. And we kind of find that, well, it's reconciled, or Gurdjieff attempts this in his own work. So let's see where he goes with this. Let's see where his analysis goes, because he combines it. He's talking about hypnotism, but hypnotism, how he's using it, has probably a different connotation to how we would use hypnotism. So, the psychic particularity, namely of falling into a hypnotic state, is, as I have said, inherent in the three brain beings only of this planet of yours. Yeah. Before explaining to you further about all this, it is here appropriate to emphasize that although during the last 20 centuries, almost the entire process of the ordinary waking existence of most of the three-brained beings, and that's what I was going to say, most people don't study phenomenology. Like, if you go to a random person on the street and say, hey, what's psychology? They have a concept. But if you ask them what's phenomenology, they're like, ology, study of phenomena. You just study stuff in the world. Like, they don't have a concept of it. So everyone's studying psychology, but they still have their own subjective elements and they project into it. That's why you get all these weird people. I like one guy said it's like the show Daria. There's a Dariaization of civilization where everyone has their own critique, or they look at you and they say, oh, that's just your ego, or and they all like critique you in a psychological way, and it's like, man, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're just projecting onto me. That's the problem. Anyway, back to Gurdjieff. Here appropriate to emphasize that although during the last 20 centuries, almost the entire process of ordinary waking existence of most of the free-brain beings who have taken your fancy, particularly of the beings of contemporary times, flows under the influence of this inherency of theirs. Nevertheless, they themselves give the name hypnotic state only to the state of theirs during which the processes of this particular property flow in them acceleratedly, and the results of which are obtained concretely. So Gurdjieff is basically saying we're in a state of hypnosis all the time. It's just what we call the hypnotic state, where someone's kind of stupefied. He says that's that's just a really accelerated process, or a high octave of the state that we're in always. We're always a little bit stupefied, just always a little hypnotized, apparently. We live our life stupefied and asleep, dreaming that we're awake, but we're not actually awake. And they fail to notice, or as they would say, they are not struck by irregular results of this inherency, which has recently become fixed in the ordinary process of their existences. Because on the one hand, in the absence, in them in general, of normal self-perfecting, they have not what is called a wide horizon. Very interesting. And on the other hand, arising and existing according to the principle itoklonas. The wide horizon is an interesting thing, because that's what Gurdjieff says that in other places, where he's like, what you need to be is a great generalist. Only the generalist can do the work. The jack of all trades, master of none, but better than a master of one. So I'm just reading what Marshall said. I'm in the state of sissy hypnosis all the time. Yes, Marshall. Now donate, kitten. Donate to the stream. It has already become inherent in them to quickly forget what they perceive. That's an interesting statement. But when the said results of this inherency, because it's interesting, quickly forget, what's one of Gurdjieff's main kind of shticks? You need to self-remember. They quickly forget. Anyway, inherency of theirs are obtained acceleratedly, concentratedly, then every kind of irregular manifestation of their own and those of others become real to such a degree that they become acutely obvious even to their bob-tailed reason, and therefore unavoidably perceptible. Dave on the dance floor says, I just started reading the intro to magic books by Evola. The group, they mentioned this hypno state of mind at the very beginning. Yeah. I mean, there's a kind of in-between state, pardon me, that you can get into in certain practices, and it's that hypnagogic state where you can kind of do magic stuff. But you get yourself into that state intentionally and consciously Here, we're just in a kind of a dull state all the time, and a hypnotist can just accelerate that dull state that's what the art of hypnotism is. It seems to be you're accelerating this dull state so it becomes more concrete in a person. And then you can just make like the whole kind of trance thing. You can then, in a hypnotic state, you can make people do things, but there's also some creepy things. One of the reasons why science always avoids hypnosis, or it makes people uncomfortable, is because hypnotists, they seemingly can make people do things, but then there's some things where they hypnotize a person and go, okay, now speak Swedish, and the person will just start speaking another language. And they have no prior knowledge of that, and, weird things like that happen. So it's very interesting. Hypnosis, says Dylan. Yes, exactly. Dull and daft. But even if certain of them should by chance notice something illogical in their manifestations, or in the manifestations of others, then thanks to the absence in them of the knowledge of the law of typicality. What is the law of typicality? They at best ascribe it to the particularities of the character of the given beings. This abnormal particular property of their psyche was first constated by the learned beings of the city Gob. That's interesting. Gob of the country Mariplessi. There's an Egyptian god called Geb, or sometimes it's written as Gob, so that's interesting. Geb or Keb. It's the, how everyone goes on about the Egyptian goddess Nut, or Nut, the goddess of the sky. Her husband is Gob or Geb, or Keb. So that's a little interesting. There's a city called Gob in Mariplessi. Work yourself into an ecstatic, manic state of musical, whimsical, rhythmic energy. Yeah, maybe that's what Sufis do. That's how they get into that hypnagogic state and do magic or something. And even then, they made it a serious, detailed branch of science, which spread over the whole planet under the name of non-responsible manifestations of personality. Non-responsible manifestations of personality. That's interesting. So, but it's basically, he's saying hypnosis was known all over the planet at one point, and then it was kind of lost or forgotten. And he says he uses the term Mariplessi. So remember, Mariplessi, Tikli-Amish, all those civilizations, that is post-Atlantis, but prehistory. So that's interesting. But later, when the turn of their regular process of reciprocal destruction came around, there we go, so it was lost due to wars, this detailed branch of their science, which was then still comparatively normal, began, like all their good attainments, to be gradually forgotten, and finally also entirely disappeared. And only many centuries later did this branch of their science again show signs of reviving. But thanks to the fact that at this period most of the learned beings there had already become learned beings of new formation, they sat upon this new revival so firmly that before the poor thing had time to develop, it soon found its way into their common, what is called, rubbish heap. So basically, he's talking about Mesmer, and the beginnings of hypnotism could have been something great, but they were just like, no, it's pseudoscience, and then just chucked it away. God damn academy. And this happened. So I'm just reading the chat. And this happened in the following way. A humble learned being there, unlike his contemporaries, Mesmer by name, hey, my boy, and by birth from what is called Austria-Hungary. Once happened, a lot of things happen in Austria-Hungary. Not just the Germanic part, but there's some interesting stuff in Austria-Hungary. Once happened to notice clearly during certain of his experiments, the real duality of consciousness and beings like himself. He was greatly impressed by this and devoted himself entirely to this question, which interested him. Continuing to observe and to study, he almost succeeded in understanding the reason. But when later he began making practical experiments for the elucidation of certain details, well, it was just then that there began to be manifested toward him that particularity proper to the learned beings of new formation there. This particularity of the learned beings of the earth of new formation is called pecking to death. Oh, yeah. So this is the scientists just pecking him to death. Hit me, baby. Dylan, stop. Yeah, this is the skepticism, the critique, the what do you call it? The professional skeptics, or as I like to call them, professional scoffers. As this honest Austro-Hungarian learned being then began making his elucidating experiments, not as all the learned beings of the earth of new formation had in general become mechanized to do, he was, according to the custom there, very meticulously pecked to death. Single tear. And this process of the pecking to death of this poor Mesmer was then so effective that it has already passed its own momentum to the learned beings of the earth from generation to generation. Yeah. I could go into a huge tangent here about my gripes. So that's everyone thinks science is objective nowadays, but far from so. The tragedy of science can really be summed up in a story with 3 parts. First, science started out trying to prove things. We're going to prove this right. But this had problems with it. You can't always prove everything. So then they found ways, Karl Popper, why don't we disprove something? And you continuously disprove something, and the things that can't be disproven or can't be falsified are closer to the truth. And so that's the black swan metaphor. You can... the black swan metaphor, for those who don't know, imagine, and you can say it like a story, imagine a philosopher one day saying, there is only white swans. They make this statement. And then you go, well, prove, there could be a black swan. And then they say, prove it. And so you go out and you find a white swan. And then you bring it back and you go, see, this is just more evidence for my theory. It's truth. And the more you study, the more white swans you find. The more experiments you do, the more you go out, the more white swans you find, the more it looks like this statement, there are only white swans, is correct. But the truth is, black swans do exist. They existed in Australia. And so when Australia was found, it blew everyone's mind. Black swans do exist. And it's this thing of you try to disprove your theory to get close to the truth. But what Karl Popper and scientists didn't quite understand, and Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher of science, he's got that book, what is it, Theory of Scientific Paradigms or something? Revolution of Scientific Paradigms? There's a psychological aspect to science, which scientists don't want to admit. They want to be like, no, we're objective. And it's like, well, think of it this way. Think of that scientist. Think of that philosopher saying there are only white swans. Think of him and all of the white, and he just collects more and more evidence. He has this theory, and his name is on the theory. And then one day, you bring a black swan to him. What is he going to do? All of that ego, all of that effort, his entire life is put into that theory. He can admit that he's wrong and discard his life's work, or he could kill you and kill the black swan and bury its corpse and thus continue on as he was going anyway. And it's like no one wants to admit that they do that, but that's something that happens. That's something that is Thomas Kuhn shows. It's like instead of admitting that they're wrong, scientists just change the parameters of their tests to kind of keep going in the direction that they want to go in. So, this is the manipulation of p-values. And this has huge ramifications, not just in the field of psychology, but, all throughout all science. Physics is going through a crisis at the moment because of string theory not working out. They wasted 40 years, lol. That's what you get. The friggin', even like something like not just a random professor in Wittgenstein somewhere, made a fake paper. It's like, no, there's top scientists in Harvard get 11 of their papers redacted because they did some p-hacking in statistics, and their papers are just wrong. And it's just like, what really happens in science? What happens, I shouldn't say in science, what happens in the academy is people put forward something, and instead of, you peck it to death. But what you allow to survive isn't necessarily truth. It's just things that you can't falsify. But maybe there are some things you want to let through, and so you don't peck them to death hard enough. And then there are some things that may be true, but you find ways around them, and you peck them to death anyway. I'm thinking of the field of parapsychology. That field is so maligned. And there are even instances where a skeptic will do a parapsychological study and then it will come out positive. Like and then they'll just change their p-values. They'll p-hack to then make it a null result. So it's like they'll actually like have a successful trial and it's like, oh, telepathy exists? No. And then they p-hack their own results and it's like, yeah, actually it didn't work out. See the statistics. And it's like, it goes both ways, bruh. It goes both ways. So and Gurdjieff is basically just pointing this out all the way back in the 1920s. It wasn't, what happens nowadays in psychology and physics was happening back then with Mesmer, basically. Happens all the time, Tyler says. Solar physics blows up our view of the cosmos, but no one wants to admit it. Yeah, exactly. Poor Mesmer. Poor Mesmer. So, for instance, all the books now existing there on the question of this hypnotism, and of such books there are thousands there, always begin by saying that this Mesmer was nothing, more or less than a rogue with an itching palm and a charlatan of the first water, but that our honest and great learned beings very soon saw through him, and prevented his doing any kind of mischief. The more learned the beings, the more the learned beings of recent times of this peculiar planet are themselves personally, in the sense of idiotism, squared, the more they criticize Mesmer and say or write concerning him every possible kind of absurdity to bring him into contempt. So they just did a hit piece, destroyed his character and destroyed his work. And in doing this, they criticize exactly that humble and honest learned being of their planet, who, if he had not been pecked to death, would have revived that science, which alone is absolutely necessary to them, and by means of which alone perhaps they might have been saved from the consequences of the organ Kundabuffer. This is a big key, because he's basically saying, not in what is modern hypnotism and all of the things that kind of come out of modern hypnotism and bleed into some psychological field, maybe, well, you know, things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, not the other thing, NLP, neurolinguistic programming, all of those things connect back to Mesmer. And he's basically saying if Mesmer's science was taken further, it could have actually reversed the results of the Kundabuffer. That is very interesting. So it is something, because it's something, mesmerism isn't just psychological, like you're doing a hypnotic trick on someone. It was also energetic. Animal magnetism. It combined both mind consciousness and energy in one science. Very interesting. So let's keep going. Let's see where he goes with this, because I know in this chapter he talks about higher being bodies, and that's what we're interested in. So there is no harm in remarking here that just when I was leaving that planet forever, precisely the same was being repeated there as had occurred to this Mesmer. Namely, on this occasion, an honest and humble learned being there from among the beings of the community, France, after persistent and conscientious labors, came across the possibility of curing the terrible disease, the spreading of which also had in recent times assumed a general planetary character. This terrible disease is there called cancer. Okay, so Gurdjieff is claiming that in ages gone by, a guy in France cured cancer and then everyone just assassinated him and destroyed his work. So let's see what he has to say. As this Frenchman also made practical experiments, not in the usual fashion there, for the elucidation of the details of his discovery, other contemporary learned beings thereupon also manifested toward him the same particularity of theirs to peck him to death. I think that's something that Julius Evola says in Introduction to Magic. He says, there's a conspiracy of science. You have to arrive at a certain place in a certain way that the Academy does. If you don't use their methods and arrive where they tell you to, then you are an enemy. And it's like, yeah, pretty much. I mean, look at what happens look at the slander that Graham Hancock just has placed on him all the time now. Possibly now, in your presence, also there already begin to be crystallized the data for the engendering always in corresponding cases of the being impulse of an indubitable conviction concerning this fact, that thanks only to the learned beings of new formation there, in whom there has already been implanted the mentioned particularity, namely of not failing to peck to death every colleague of theirs who does not do the same, as has already been fixed by the abnormally established conditions of ordinary being existence established there will never proceed in the presences of the three-brained beings of this ill-fated planet Earth of yours, what is called the sacred Antkuano, upon which, among other things, the very saintly Ashiata Shaimash also counted. Okay, so let's keep an eye out for what this word means. Antkuano. So he's basically just saying, because of the culture of pecking to death, people learn to peck to death their colleagues. And I mean, this is intensified in modern day, scientific journalism. You have to kind of assassinate your peers so that you get put forward, because if you don't publish, you die. Publish or drown, is that what they call it? Anyway. But this essence-loving hope of his, I chanced to learn during my investigations concerning his very saintly activities there. So is this Ashiata Shaimash he's talking about, or is this the Frenchman? You, my boy, perhaps still do not know in what, namely, the cosmic process of the sacred Antkuano consists. So just a second. The Antkuano exists on the planet Earth, but was it stopped by something? They will never proceed in the presence of three-brained beings, the sacred process of Antkuano. And why? It's because they peck to death. Everyone pecks to death each other, so it stops this process from happening. Okay, I'm just keeping that in mind. The scientific method, Dylan says, the scientific method combines fairy magic and musical notes with druidic bloodlines, scion tests, and changelings over time. Okay. The sacred Antkuano is the name of the process of perfecting objective being reason. Okay, this is also important, because you want to perfect your being reason as well as obtain a higher being body. Because if you just perfect being reason, then when you die, you're kind of like, I don't know, do you still persist or do you dissolve into everything? And then it's like you also want a higher being body, because then if you die, you just become a sacred idiot that will last as long as the planets and all the stars. So you kind of want both. So, okay, so Antkuano is the process of perfecting objective being reason in the three-centered beings, which process proceeds by itself simply from the flow of time. So that's interesting. So basically, if people are left to their own and they aren't tampered with, I guess over a long enough time period, which we used to have a different age rank, like our age, like a human used to live, what, thousands of years naturally? But then our age slowly declined, and so we're kind of screwed now. It used to be we lived thousands of years, and just over those thousands of years, naturally, through the flow of time, our being reason would just become objective naturally. But now we have not only lost the capacity to do this, something is blocking Antkuano, but also our lifespan has gotten shorter as well. So we actually need to apply intention and will to developing objective being reason. So let's see what this is where I think he's going. So let's see what he says. As a rule, everywhere on those planets of our great universe upon which three-brained beings breed, the perfecting of objective reason can proceed in them only from personal conscious labors and intentional sufferings. This sacred Antkuano can proceed only in those planets upon which, in general, all cosmic truths have become known to all beings. So you need to know all the cosmic truths. Maybe, can we know them consciously, or can we at least just have them in us subconsciously? This is a question that arises. So, or do we already have them subconsciously, and that's the point, you need to bring the subconscious into consciousness? Let's see what he says. Marshall Esoteric says, who even wants to advance their career in academia? Career advancement in academia speaks to the small nature and poverty of that person's soul. They have surely engaged in people-pleasing. Yeah, exactly. And all cosmic truths usually become known to all on those planets, thanks to that fact that the beings of the given planets, who by their conscious labors learn some truth or other, share it with other beings of their planet, and in this way, all the cosmic truths gradually become known by all the beings of the planet without any distinction. Okay. Oh. Dave on the dance floor asked in the chat, is three-brained similar to three-part soul model? No. I mean, maybe there's a connection. What he means by three brains is something that has a rational mind, an emotional mind, and an instinctual, motor instinctual mind. So in his something, Gurdjieff would consider something like a worm. Would you love me if I was still a worm, guys? A worm is just a one-brained being. So it has a brain. Like a plant doesn't have a nervous system. It's still a being, you could say. It still grows and has a kind of intentionality. It moves towards the sun. It intends to move towards the sun. But they don't have brains. A worm technically has a brain. You know, insects have brains, lizards have brains, but they're kind of one-brained beings. Whereas you could say of actual biologically, someone that has a mammalian, the animals that have the mammalian brain, that's the emotional brain. Animals that have a kind of an emotional intelligence, some have a lot of emotional intelligence, you know, dolphins, dogs, things like that. They are two-brained beings, and then three-brained beings are beings with reason, being reason. So animals, you know, they're wonderful, blah, 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 they're so pure. Humans have ego. Ew. Well, because we have three brains, we can do things that animals can't. You know, a fish is great at swimming, better than us, but a fish can't fly. A bird is great at flying, but not necessarily good at surviving on the ground or in a desert or in icy tundras or under the water. Humans can do all of those things with being reason. Now, the problem with our being reason is we've been corrupted by the Kundabuffer organ, and here we are with masses of ego and a divided consciousness and elements of the Kundabuffer organ, and we're all messed up. So we're trying to unmess ourselves up. We're trying to return ourselves to a state of Eden and then do a greater work. So that's what a three-brained being is. It's one of those things controversial, like, could you say an ape is a three-brained being? Because some monkeys can kind of, they learn sign language, and even though you can't have a philosophical talk with a monkey, they can, like, make out basic sentences. And so it's like, are they three-brained beings? What about octopuses? There's some really interesting studies with science and octopuses, because when they rate intelligences of animals, they say an octopus is about a level of a dog, but that's actually not true. Octopuses are way more intelligent. They do weird things, and they also hold grudges. There's studies where, like, an octopus will identify a scientist and will, like, if that scientist feeds them, they'll deliberately not eat the food of the scientist. Or there was one where it's like the octopus would grab the delicious food that the scientist gave them and went up to the vent, like the kind of the cleaning vent in the tank that it was in, and just stuffed the food in the tank to clog the fan to make the tank dirty, and did it while looking the scientist in the eye, just like, screw you, bro, I hate you. It's like they hold grudges. And there's, you know, you hear stories of, like, you know, in like one aquarium, there was like the fish in another tank kept disappearing, and then when they looked at the cameras, an octopus would, like, climb out of its tank, go across the floor, climb into the other tank, eat the fish, but then have the sense to climb out and go back to its tank and climb back in, so no one would know it did it. And so they've done some things where they've given octopuses IQ tests. Now, if you've done an IQ test, you know immediately what the problem is with IQ tests. Real IQ tests that aren't like a Facebook IQ test where they just, like, give you a little, give you, you know, what's your favorite color or something, you know. A real IQ test has a trait, and I'll tell you what the trait of a real IQ test is. A real IQ test is frickin' boring as hell, and it takes ages. And this is the problem of the octopuses. Octopuses are creatures of novelty, so they get them to do IQ tests, and they actually perform really well, but then they just get bored and stop doing them. And so you can't actually measure the intelligence of an octopus properly, like via a human standard, but they seem to be super, super intelligent. So it's one of those things where it's like, octopuses, are they technically three-brained beings in the standard of what Gurdjieff would say? It's an interesting thought to think. Anyway, what else is happening in chat? Ashiat Shaimash's third striving to learn the laws of world creation and maintenance. Oh, yeah. So Obligonian being maintenance, the being striving. So this is part of the Atkuano principle is a part of that. Based octopuses, same with elephants and certain birds like crows. Exactly. I had a rat return to their tank with food. They make it their home and choose to return. Exactly. So you could say these are beings that are moving towards a certain state, but it's like it's the humans. The humans are not animals in esoteric things. They're supposed to belong to a different kingdom. There is a rung of a ladder of being. You know, you have, I guess, basic stuff like just the elements, the earth, and then you have plants, and then you have animals, and then there's the rung that's supposed to be human, and then there's higher being states above that. And the problem with the rung of human is we've degenerated so much we're basically down to the same level as animal. So we actually have to return to our sacred place and then go further. It's like what Nietzsche said, man, what is man? Man is but a rope that stretches across an abyss, and on one end is the animal, at the other end is the Superman. And it's like, technically, no, we're not even on the rope yet. Most people are just at the animal stage. They're just rational animals. And it's like, we need to become human. We need to get on the rope first. And then not only that, we need to get to the other side and make it to the next rung of the ladder. That's the kind of the game we're playing. So anyway, I've went off on a huge tangent there. Let's keep going. So, thanks to this sacred process, intentionally actualized by our all-foreseeing common endlessness Father, it is foreseen that in the three-brained beings of the given planet, during the process in their presences of the fundamental cosmic holy law of the Triamazi Kamno, the superfluity of its third holy force thereby obtained, namely the force of the sacred reconciling, should by itself crystallize data in them for engendering that something which is what is called being ego at Urasnian will. This is interesting. It's interesting, reconciling force as well, because they say we need to create a third world within us, and this is what self-remembering does. You know, we have our consciousness and we have our subconsciousness, but we're conscious only in the sense that it is something opposing something else called the subconsciousness. It's not one thing. It's not the true thing. And so between the consciousness and the subconsciousness is a borderland, the in-betwixt, the in-between. And it's there that we need to create a secret third thing. That's where the holy reconciling force needs to begin to crystallize this state of self-remembering. Well then, the mentioned particular property recently newly fixed in the common presences of your favorites is that the functioning of their mentioned zoostat, so our state of consciousness. So we have two zoostats, a conscious and an unconscious part, or as they themselves would say, their spiritual part, passes into the functioning of their common whole, which properly proceeds during their completely passive state, that is, during their sleep, and during their sleep of theirs, the entire functioning of their planetary body continues to remain such as it became proper to it to be during their waking state. Ugh. Let me just read that in. Properly proceeds during their completely passive state in sleep, and during this sleep of theirs, their entire functioning of their planetary body continues to remain as it became proper during their waking state. Huh? What? I think it's like the body repairs itself during sleep, or maybe we just we dream that we're awake. Anyway, I'm just gonna keep moving. In order that you should better represent to yourself and understand the results flowing from such an astonishing psychic property, you must first of all know about two facts actualized in the common presences of these favorites of yours. One of these facts is produced in their common presence thanks to the existing cosmic law of self-adaptation of nature. Okay. And the other fact flows from the abnormal conditions of ordinary being existence established by themselves, about which I have repeatedly spoken. So we're not just fighting against ourselves, we're fighting against a flow of nature that has just adapted to a kind of a twisted way of being. And it's like, but it's natural. No, technically it's not. Nature has just adapted itself to be that way, but we need to actually fix it. Nature is wrong and we are right. The first fact is that from the time when, owing to their abnormal existence, there began to be formed in them what is called the two-system zoostat, that is, two dependent consciousnesses. Then great nature began gradually to adapt herself, and finally adapt herself to this, that after they arrive at a certain age, there begin to proceed in them two come on, Gurgi. Incliazanic. Nick? It's like you go to Nick, and then you immediately have to go Sha. Incliaz anikshanaz. Shanaz? How would you say that? Shanaz. Shanas. Incliaz anak. Incliaz anik shanas. Incliazanik shanas. There begin to proceed in them two incliaz anikshanas. Boom. Got it. Of two different, what are called tempos. That is, as they themselves would say, two blood circulations of different kind. Oh, martial esotericists ask, oh damn, implications of that, haha, Gurdjieff possibly anti-natural selection. Well, I mean, it's one of those things, nature just does as she does. It's more of a, yeah, you flow with nature, but also there is something superior to nature. This is like the whole thing when you study the hydrogen system. The hydrogen system keeps us alive. Nature has a flow, she gives us certain shocks, but there are some shocks that are just absent which we ourselves need to apply to go further. So it's not that what she does is necessarily wrong, it's just she loves us. But at the same time, she doesn't care that we reach our full potential. She just wants us to continuously breed. So it's not that he's anti-natural selection, it's just that he's a pro-super selection, maybe I should say. So, from this certain age mentioned, each one of these incliazanikshanas of different tempo, that is to say, each blood circulations. So we have two types of blood circulation. I wonder what he's getting to there. Begins to evoke in them the functioning of one of their mentioned consciousnesses. Vice versa, the intensive functioning of each begins to evoke in them a kind of blood circulation corresponding to it. This seems like he's getting to, what is it, the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. You have a nervous system, a greater sympathetic nervous system, and then you have a parasympathetic nervous system, and one you can kind of control and the other is a part of the subconscious or unconscious regulating system. That's very interesting. I'm pretty sure parasympathetic nervous system was first mentioned around, or first was brought to public academia, what it was like in the 1920s, like around that time Gurdjieff was around. So this is really interesting. Gurdjieff is like integrating into his stuff like really cutting edge science here. It's so funny because on one hand, Gurdjieff continuously disses the academy, but on the other hand, he's always cutting edge. He's like he's on the cutting edge of everything. He's extracting what's useful and then just being like, also these guys are losers. The difference between these two independent kinds of blood circulation in their common presences is actualized by means of what is called tempo-davlakshirian circulation. Okay, I got that. Got that in one. Or according to the expression there, expression there of what is called contemporary medicine, the difference of the filling of the blood vessels. That is to say, in the condition of the waking state, the center of gravity of the blood pressure in their common presences obtains in one part of the general system of blood vessels, and in the condition of the passive state in another part of the blood vessels. Interesting. This concept is we just have kind of two systems that fire differently and do different things. This is interesting. I'm thinking of Tantra as well, because in men, I'm not sure what it is in women, you have a greater sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. One is fight or flight. One is fight or flight. One is relaxation. What's interesting to note is tantric, segs, let's be real here. Did you know in the male, your erection and your to gooning ejaculation and erection are controlled by two different systems. So your erection is actually controlled by parasympathetic, which I think is the passive relaxed state, and fight or flight, that's gooning. That's connected to the ejaculation. So tantric systems where you go slow, you do the segs, but you go slow, and even non-ejaculatory, you sublimate your vril. That gets you into the parasympathetic nervous system, and it works with the parasympathetic nervous system. This is very interesting. Little connection there. So, because I'm always thinking about higher being bodies, and Gurdjieff mentions Eksiohari. Gurdjieff talks about how like higher being bodies just kind of crystallize, but every now and then he mentions the Eksiohari, the sexual fluids, and that which is extracted from that, and the hydrogen C12 and all of that. Oh, True River King says systematic and pulmonary circulation. Okay. The heart, to the heart and from the heart. That's what he's mentioning. There does seem to be like some nervous system stuff going on in here. But anyway, I mean, whether it is or it isn't, it's Gurdjieff knows his stuff. You can see his generalist nature coming through here. It gives him this very broad and very interesting perspective. And the second fact, the fact ensuing from the abnormal conditions of being existence of your favorites, is that when from the very beginning of the arising of their offspring, they intentionally try every kind of means for the purpose of making them respond to these abnormal conditions around them, to fix in their logic Nesterian localizations as many impressions as possible obtained exclusively from such artificial perceptions as are again due to the results of their abnormal existence. Which maleficent action of theirs towards their offspring they call education. School, hate it. Then the totality of all such artificial perceptions gradually segregates itself in their common presences, and acquires its own independent functioning, connected only as much with the functioning of their planetary body as is necessary merely for its automatic manifestation. And the totality of these artificial perceptions is then perceived by them owing to their naivety as their real consciousness. But as for the sacred data for genuine being consciousness put into them by great nature, which consciousness ought to be possessed by them from the very beginning of their preparation for possible existence, together with the properties inherent in them, which engender in them the genuine sacred being impulse, faith, hope, and love, and conscience, these data become gradually also isolated, being left to themselves, evolve independently of the intentions of the responsible beings, and of course also independently of the bearers of them themselves, and come to be regarded as what is called the subconsciousness. Yes, very interesting. So as kids, we all dreamed, and we had really vivid dreams, but then we grew up, and it's like, what did you dream of yesterday? I don't really dream anymore. Yeah, because we're just so separated from it. That's why dream work is kind of important. It's also interesting, I forgot to mention before when I was reading, he mentioned about the Ant-Carano principle, and he mentioned it, the development of objective being reason is from objective truths being received by the person embedded in them. And I was going to say, this is another reason why Gurdjieff speaks highly of reading mythology, and why he says reading mythology strikes the higher emotional cylinder. Because I have this thing maintained that within mythology is a type of mimetic device, a legomism in and of itself. It embeds knowledge into it, and then you're able to receive it through that mythology. Mythology is alive. History is dead facts, and it may be important to study history, but mythology is action, living action of your ancestors that's eternal and recurring. And so it may be that reading world mythology in a very general sense also embeds in you, even if subconsciously, these objective being truths, and then may help you develop objective being reason. Wait, could the two coiled snakes relate to the two symbols, to the two nervous systems, says Dave on the dance floor? Yeah, probably. Yeah, that could be symbolic of that. I mean, it's all dual nature. We're all dual natured. We have two systems, two consciousnesses, and what do we need? We need that third thing. We need the synthesis, the reconciling force. Thanks only to such a, in the objective sense, a maleficence, but according to their naive subjective understanding, benevolence towards their offspring. What do you mean you homeschool your kids? That's cruel. Your kids are going to grow up weird. Good. All the sacred data put in by general nature herself for forming in them their real being consciousness became isolated and remained during their entire period of their existence in their almost private state, and every kind of impression unavoidably perceived. By means of the 6 being skernalitsionics. I don't think we've heard this word before. This is a new word, so let's pay attention, see what he says. Marshall Esoterist said, I just hope my ancestors were part of the warrior class. If that's the case, Lamau. I mean, in the end, whatever our ancestors were, we have to develop within ourselves the warrior and the priest and the laborer. We have to learn to labor ourselves. We have to, so we can be independent. We have to have the priest within us, because the priest symbolically is what? It's the guy who mediates the rest of society, between the rest of society and the spiritual world. So we need to be our own priest. We need to be able to mediate between the divine and ourselves. We need that relationship. And the thing is, the laborer and the priest kind of hate each other. They're opposites. The laborer just wants to get to what's practical, just wants to, just live off the land. And the priest is more abstract and philosophical, and the metaphysical things are what matter to him. But we also need the warrior poet, who is kind of not a synthesis of the two, but he's the thing that's in between the two. He, is the kind of the guardian of the society, the aristocratic guardian of the society that also, protects everyone, but also regulates, follows the laws, dispenses justice, fights off the invaders. We need that warrior nature inside of us to develop inside of us, whether we come from warrior stock or not. We need the warrior, the laborer, and the priest. We need to become a synthesis of all three. That's what a modern initiate has to be. It's interesting, every now and then you'll see something like, I think Dion Fortune says it's like, it takes 3 lives to become an initiate, a true initiate. So it's like it's kind of like an implication of, you get initiated into an occult society, and then that life is kind of just done studying, and then when you die, you are naturally, magnetically, via recurrence, drawn back into a new life, and you find the mysteries again, and then in this next life, you kind of do the work. But it develops certain qualities in you, and then when you die again and you reincarnate again, you are found into when you find the mysteries for the 3rd time, that's when everything coagulates and you become a real initiate. That's what she's implying. But really, you need to do that all in one. That's what you kind of need to do. Kings and priests. Yeah, we need to become the sacred king. The sacred king is a synthesis of both the warrior and the priest. Wiser spacefaring species can dupe us, just like we can dupe ants. Conversely, ants can sense things their superiors cannot. So the same with us, eh? Yes. Yes, Tim Sim from the chat, exactly. Marshall Esoterist says, that's a good analysis. I do need to cultivate different aspects of myself. Yeah. But we'll all still have a center of gravity or a tendency to one or the other. One will have a tendency to the mystic, one will have a tendency to the warrior, one will have a tendency to the hearth and the cultivation of that. But in essence, we need to, if you want to walk the 4th way, you've got to be balanced. In the Kali Yuga, in this day and age, as Gurdjieff says, you need to be a generalist, because you need to be able to adapt and solve any problem. Before you could go, I guess, to a specialist, and a priest can solve your spiritual problems, the laborer can solve your physical problems, the warrior poet can help with those problems, but you got to solve all your own problems now. So you literally need the most general approach as possible. Anyway, let's keep going. So it was this word here we got to get on. Skernalitsionic. onyx. Let's see what this means, or in their terminology, sense organs. Okay. So we have 6 sense organs. Interesting. So sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. What's the 6th one? Present in their presences for the specific perception of externals. By the way, they count them as 5. Come to be localized. What's the 6th one, Gurdjieff? Tell us. Acquiring their isolated functioning gradually become predominant for the whole of their common presence. Although such a localization of accidentally perceived impressions is found in them, and although they are aware of its action, yet in respect of any functioning inherent in their planetary body, as well as in respect of the acquisition in their common presence of objective reason, it plays no part. Okay, let me just read that again. Although such a localization of accidentally perceived impressions is found in them, and although they are aware of its action, yet in respect to any functioning inherent in their planet, as well as in respect to their... It plays no part. Okay. So such localizations, regarding the sense organs themselves, they actually don't play a part in the development of objective or being reason necessarily. That's interesting. I'm not sure if Gurdjieff uses the Robert Flood system of the 3 minds. You know that image that everyone uses? You've seen this image before. Let me just Robert Flood brain. If I just write Robert Flood in and then just go images, will it come up with it? Yeah, this boy right here. Everyone's seen this. Everyone's seen this. This is Robert Flood's How the Mind Works, and it's all in Latin, but fundamentally it's this part here is the sense organs. There is a part of our mind that works off data from the sense organs. There's a part of our mind that works off of, what would you say, opinion? An intermediate mind that works off of beliefs. Maybe you can reason and deduce things. Like maybe you find something with your sense organs, but it's like a broken object. And you've never seen it before. But with your intermediate mind, you can deduce what the other half of it would look like. You know, you can rationalize and reason. And then there's another part of the mind. There's this third inner mind. And this is I always find this very interesting, because in modern parlance, we get people who are empiricists, we get people who are rationalists, and some people try to synthesize these two, like have them both. Some just say, no, one over the other. We need to be positivists. And it's like, no, I'm a Hegelian, we need to use rationalists to rationally deduce, Platonic forms or some bullshit. But no one quite understands that there is a secret third thing. And it's not that one is over the other. You kind of need to use all 3 to triangulate truth, to have a complete mind in a sense. But it's like Gurdjieff is basically saying, for the development of objective being reason, this part here, the data we get from it, is pretty much unnecessary. And most people just live mulling over the data they gain with their organ senses. I think that's what he's saying. So, plays no part. All these impressions, intentionally or accidentally perceived, from which the said localizations, he's using the term localization, but this is sense organ, are formed, ought to be in them only as material for confrontative logic. Pardon me. For that real being consciousness, which they should have in themselves. So let me just read that again. Are formed, ought to be in them only as material for confrontative logic. Confrontative logic. So dialectical discussion. For that real being consciousness, which they should have in themselves, and the accidental results of the perception of which, in their naivety, they sometimes now confidently regard merely as reflexes of their, in their opinion, insignificant what is called animal instinct. I still remember the section of your last video where you mentioned Hegel, and whenever you said negation, you did the Vine boom sound effect. Lol, that shit was funny. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Marshall. Only thanks to the single fact that your favorites, especially the contemporary ones, do not know at all, and even do not suspect the necessity of at least adapting their famous education to the said subconsciousness of their offspring, but that they always in everything intentionally assist every one of the rising generation to perceive impressions only from the abnormally artificial. Then thanks only to this, because he was saying before how because of our education, the way we receive impressions is kind of wrong and dulled, and we live through preconceptions more than we actually see objects in the world. So it makes sense of what he's saying, that it doesn't really develop real objective being reason. It sounds like, what Socrates and all of them were trying to say. He's trying to develop something like that, but he's saying it's actually like a real quality that is developed within you. And you're trying to develop like something that the philosophers used to develop in their education, but it's just not developed in us anymore. And we just kind of have an arbitrarily reactive being reason, which just a reactive skepticism. A lot of skepticism nowadays, and skepticism is just lazy thinking. It's just scoffing. Oh, that's not real. That's not how that works. Yeah, cool story, bro. But anyway, let's keep going. When every one of them reaches the age of a responsible being, all his being judgments and all his deductions from them are always purely, peculiarly subjective in him, and have no connection not only with the genuine being impulses arising also in him. So the being impulses that come from the subconsciousness are not connected whatsoever to the subjective being reason of the top consciousness, but also neither with those general cosmic lawful phenomena to sense which by reason is proper to every three-brained being, and by means of which there is established that connection between all the three-brained beings of all our great universe for the collective fulfillment of the common universal functioning, for which purpose everything existing in the universe just exists. Let me just read some of that again. But also neither those general cosmic lawful phenomena to sense which by reason is proper to every three-brained being, and by means of which there is established that connection between all the three-brained beings of all our great universe for the collective fulfillment of the common universal functioning, for which purpose everything existing in the universe just exists. Very interesting. I mentioned before phenomenology of Edmund Husserl. You know how he created that science was Edmund Husserl was a continental philosopher, but he was very analytical in a way. He loved studying logic, and it's like he was studying the laws of logic, and it's one of those things. It's like, oh, you have biology, and then biology is just applied chemistry, and chemistry is just applied physics, and physics is just applied math. Well, what's math? Math is just set theory, which is based on the laws of axioms of logic. And Edmund Husserl basically just went, well, what's logic based on? And he basically went to the consciousness itself and built phenomenology off of that. So it's kind of, I feel like Edmund Husserl reached kind of an objective being reason almost, of just kind of bracketing himself and trying to see the structures of logic in itself. That's what he was looking for when he invented phenomenology. You find the structures of logic itself, or the structures of the consciousness itself. And this then aids, then you look at the world, then you study phenomena, and then you get real general cosmic lawful phenomena. You get those cosmic truths that just exist, and you're able to receive them in an objective way, not a subjective way. I'm really curious. I wish Gurdjieff did. I don't know. Did Gurdjieff know Husserl? I think Gurdjieff definitely knew Freud. I'm not sure if he knew Husserl, though. It would be really interesting to see what his opinion was. Tim Sim says these phrases are now outdated. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's language. Leary and post-Watts, we could call this puzzle solving, both internal and external solving. I don't know about that. I mean, sure. For your wider understanding of this particular psychic state, it is necessary to tell you further that even up to now, they arise with every kind of data for acquiring genuine being reason. And at their arising, there are not yet in their presences any logic Nesterian growths from which there is later localized, and from which there is acquired the isolated functioning in them of the said false consciousness, but only later during their development and their preparation to become responsible beings, either by themselves or by intentional directing of their, as they call them, parents or teachers. That is to say, responsible beings who undertake the responsibility of the preparation of the given beings for responsible existence. They begin, as I said, to help intentionally in taking in and fixing only those impressions which later are data for the impulses corresponding to surrounding abnormally established conditions. So our education is really made to adapt us to bad conditions that are abnormal anyway. What our education should be is basically a phenomenological, psychological, psychoanalysis education, which helps us discover our true being impulses within us and integrate them into ourselves. D4 Square says Schwaller de Lubitz. I really want to read Schwaller de Lubitz, but I'm only one boy and I've only got so much time. Make a donation and I'll buy his books. Oh shit, where was I? Gradually informed, there just begins to be predominant in their common presence this said artificially formed consciousness of theirs. So in taking in, fixing only those impressions which later, and only then do they gradually form, there just begins to be predominant in their common presence as this said artificially formed consciousness of theirs. So people are fake. There's a really interesting, I'm just going to go off on a tangent here about Nick Land. I want to do a video of like Nick Land and Gurdjieff. I haven't studied Nick Land at all. There's literally one essay of Nick Land that I read and I was like, it's actually really good. So he has this lecture, this essay on donut cities, of what he calls donut cities. You can look it up. I should read it again because it's been a while. I'm probably going to say it wrong. But he had this whole thing, and it's a little outdated. He talks about, bad neighborhoods and how they arise. And he says, the inner core of a city, of a civilization begins to rot with corruption and bad neighborhoods arise. And it's like, things will happen in a bad neighborhood, quote unquote. Things just happen in like a school playground, which if it happened in a true community would immediately be stopped. Everyone would rise up and try to fix it, but it just doesn't. And then it just festers and this creates the bad neighborhood. And he says, what happens when the bad neighborhood festers too much? He says the inner core of the city where, the central business district where all the banks are, it becomes rotted and corrupted. And anyone good and genuine, all of those people don't necessarily leave the city, but they get pushed outwards into the suburbs. And he says, the quality gets pushed outwards, and you have this, this stratified society where the suburbs appear nice, and then there's this mafia corruption in the inner core of the city. And it's like you get this thing called a donut city, basically. But at the end of the donut city thing, and it's like, his analysis, you can like be critical about and be like, it's not really, Nick Land, blah, blah, blah. But at the end, he says a donut city creates a donut person, a person who on the outside looks, he looks very educated. He's a very learned person. He's refined. But on the inside, in their core, they're actually just rotten. And it's like, yeah. It's like, I'm like, there's kind of something here. It's like our education doesn't really prepare us at all, doesn't integrate us at all. It just aids in the creation of a false consciousness, basically, which just establishes us and attaches us to society and doesn't really lead us anywhere. True River King, going into the chat. Yep, education system is cringe. Based mention of Nick Land, lol. True River King says phenomenology equals wiseacring. Come on, man, there's got to be, we can still extract some good stuff from it, right? The Martial Esotericist says, bro, Nick Land did not age well. No, he did not. He did not. I pretend I don't know what he looks like. I just like looking at his old pictures, and it's like, that's what he looks like forever now. Shamans used to be the alarm of this phenomenon in village life. They would threaten the ne'er-do-wells with exile and death. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Tyler. Anyway, let's keep going. Let's keep going. I think we need to get through this. We're getting to an hour and a half. The totality of these localized data existing in their presences and spiritualized in them for the genuine being consciousness, which they call subconsciousness. I guess you could, sorry, just go back to True River King. The reason why phenomenology is wiseacring, really, is because it's still half a science. It needs psychoanalysis as well, or else you're not doing anything with it. And that's where phenomenology is gone. After Edmund Husserl, Heidegger came in, and he did some interesting things, but then just went peace out A-Town, and kind of just abandoned phenomenology after being in time. And then, you know, people since then, Merleau-Ponty, they haven't really taken it in the same direction that, you know, Edmund Husserl or even Bergson. Bergson said something interesting. I want to read Bergson and compare that to Gurdjieff as well one day. Bergson literally in Creative Evolution is like, the world is a machine that makes gods. And he has this very interesting take. Anyway, I'm going off on massive tangents here talking about philosophers, but there's something there. It's just incomplete. And that's why you need to be a generalist, because everything in the world is incomplete. It's like there was this one system, but it's been broken into pieces, and we need to put it back together and make our own complete system. In the words, I always quote William Blake, in the words of William Blake, I had to create my own system or risk being enslaved to another man's. Now, spiritualized, yes, totality of the localized data existing in the presences and spiritualized in them for the genuine being consciousness, which they call subconsciousness. So normal people have their normal consciousness just gets built false constructs around it, and they get attached to society. And then any genuine being data in them just goes into their subconsciousness. Not having and not acquiring any logic-Nestorian growths for confrontation and criticism, but having from the very beginning only possibilities of engendering the sacred being impulses called faith, love and hope, and conscience, always believes, always loves, always hopes in everything newly perceived. Sorry, what was that? Is that just they're always attracted to novelty or something? But yeah, this is interesting. The school education should also develop these three qualities, the true being impulses of faith, hope, love, and hope. Very esoteric Christian of you, Gurdjieff. And conscience, which is the only one that's uncorrupted because it is completely in the subconscious. And we only perceive through spontaneous impulses sometimes, spontaneous intuitions sometimes, which we need to learn to hear and obey. And really, we need to rescue this from the subconscious and make it conscious. Our conscience. And so, my boy, when thanks to a change of tempo of their blood circulation, there is obtained a temporary suspension of the action of the localization of the false consciousness. And so this is where hypnotism comes back into it. Has already become the autocratic ruler of their common presences, thereby given the sacred data of their genuine consciousness the possibility of unhindered blending with the total functioning of the planetary body. During the period of their waking state, then, indeed, my boy, if the crystallization of data for engendering in the localization an idea of something opposite to that which has already arisen in them and somehow become fixed, is assisted in a corresponding manner, and if, moreover, the actions evoked by this idea are directed upon a disharmonized part of the planetary body, an accelerated change in it possible. Ooh. But he's basically talking about the functioning of hypnosis here. So what kind of happens? This temporary suspension of one part, and then also striking different parts of the body. That's interesting. There's a book I learned about recently. Anyway, I'm going to go off on another tangent. We need to keep plowing, guys. When during the period of the Tikliamishian civilization, so keep in mind, whenever he mentions these words, he's talking about, I mentioned before, but I'll mention again, he's talking about post-Atlantis, but prehistory. Tikliamishian civilization, the learned beings of the locality Mariplesi first constated in their common psyche the special possibility of such combinations, and began to search for ways of intentionally bringing one another into this special state. They soon understood and found the possibility of actualizing this by the means of what is called being hanbledzoin. So the blood of the astral body. This is the first time he mentions it here, I believe. So let's see where he goes with this. This is a very interesting concept as well. Pardon me. See where he goes. So, namely, in the cosmic substance, the essence of which the three-brained beings of the contemporary civilization came close to understanding, and which they called animal magnetism. So hanbledzoin is a literal substance, just like animal magnetism via mesmer is a literal substance that comes out of you and can go into people. And it's the blood of the astral body, which is interesting. I should also mention, if you study the hydrogens diagram, the Gurdjieff's hydrogens, oh, Tyler says my copy is completely different here. That's interesting. I should get out my physical copy and see what it says. Let me just make a note of this. That point there, 32. I'll check it after the stream. Animal magnetism. Animal magnetism is connected to Gurdjieff's hydrogen theory. It is, I mean, this is going to be kind of meaningless to some people. People who study the hydrogen theory, the I believe it's FAR 96 in the food line of the diagram. There is animal magnetism is basically a buildup of FAR 96, which is interesting. So that's, is it FAR 96 or is it the one after that? Now it's got to be FAR 96 because after that is the 48 hydrogen, which is in the intellectual center. So let's keep going now. Meme Analysis did a video on Mesmer and his animal magnetism. He says that the phenomenon of Riz is similar to... Yeah, well, that's just it. When you read animal magnetism, there is this thing of like, it's energy and it's this and that, but it's also like... I always find it funny because I remember someone describing animal magnetism as, you know, when you watch an anime and there's a character that just has glitter around their face, like, ting. It's like, that's animal magnetism, bro. I'm like, yeah, basically. The concept of Riz is very connected to that. So since for the explanation of the given case, and also perhaps for my following explanations, you must know more in detail concerning being hanbledzoin. So remember, Gurdjieff is talking about his sixth sojourn here, which he went off talking about how he was a physician who did hypnotism, and then he went off on like a big tangent about the history of hypnotism, and then about the sciences, and the subconscious consciousness, and now he's going to teach us about hanbledzoin. Let's keep this thread here. I find it necessary before speaking further to inform you just now about this cosmic substance. Cosmic substance. Let's go. And this is different from Askoken, remember? We all humans produce Askoken, but this is different. Hanbledzoin is different. It's nothing else than the blood of the Kesdjan body, the astral body. So what it makes me wonder, like, if you don't have a Kesdjan body crystallized yet, do you have hanbledzoin? And what is this, the blood of the Kesdjan body? In your work, do you build up hanbledzoin in you, and then a blob of hanbledzoin within you crystallizes into the Kesdjan body? Is that what happens? So these are questions that we just keep in mind as we go forward. Kesdjan body of the being. Just as the cosmic substances called in totality blood serve for nourishing and renewing the planetary body of the being, so also hanbledzoin serves in the same way for nourishing and perfecting the body Kesdjan. So it's interesting, you can have an astral body, but you still need to supply it to feed it. It is necessary to tell you that in general the quality of the composition of the blood in three-brained beings, and also in the common presences of your favorites, depends on the number of being bodies already completely formed. Okay, it's just saying it is necessary to tell you that in general the quality of the composition of the blood in the three-brained beings. and also in the common presences of your favorites depends on the number of being bodies. So Gurdjieff often talks about, you know, the Kesdjan body, and we have a planetary body, but there's more. We sometimes have a mental body, and maybe there's a causal body or the body of the soul already completely formed. And is Handbled-Zoin not just Kesdjan body, but also all the other bodies? Is it the same Handbled-Zoin in the higher bodies as well as the Kesdjan body? Or it does, like, is Handbled-Zoin, it's this refinement, it's the animal magnetism, which Handbled-Zoin then is connected to Fa96 if you connect it to the hydrogens. So does that mean that 96 hydrogen, does it go through another process and it's like a more refined hydrogen in the higher body? Very interesting. You know what I mean? There's some lots of interesting questions intersect here. But let's just go with what he's saying, because this is the first time he's introducing this concept. So he always does these concepts in kind of layers, already completely formed. Blood in the presences of three-brained beings may be composed of substances arising through the transformation of the three separate independent order called general cosmic sources of actualizing. Okay? The substance of that part of the being blood, which is designed by nature for serving the planetary body of the being, arise by means of the transformation of substances of that planet on which the given beings are formed and exist. But the substances which are designed for serving the Kesdjan body of the being, the totality of which is called Handbled-Zoin, are obtained from the transformation of elements of other planets. Okay, hold on. The substance, so substance part of the being blood, which is designed for nature planetary body. Okay, so our blood is made from substance of our planet. So I'm tripping over my words here, but substances which are designed for serving the Kesdjan body of the being are obtained from the transformation of elements of other planets. I'm feeling solar rays here, boy. I'm feeling solar rays. I'm feeling planetary magic. I'm getting hype. And of the sun itself, of that system. So planetary rays, but specifically the sun itself. My PP is throbbing right now. I'm not sure about you guys, but this is connecting. A True River King says Handbled-Zoin is multi-bodied, yes. Cosmic rays and solar rays, baby, says Tyler, yeah. Where the given three-brained being has the place of his arising in existence. Exactly. Very interesting. Very interesting. Finally, that part of the being blood, which almost everywhere is called the sacred being Handbled-Zoin, and only on certain planets is called sacred... Halden. Did I get that? I'll go for that. Let's just go for that. And which part serves the highest part of the being, called the soul, is formed from the direct emanations of our most holy Son Absolute. Okay, so Handbled-Zoin may be in different bodies. So in the soul body, the causal body, maybe it's called that. So Handbled-Zoin is multi-bodied, and in the different bodies it may have different names, but you can generally just say it's all Handbled-Zoin. I'm just going to go with that framework for now. Substances required for the planetary body of the being enter into them through their first being food, or as your favorites say, through food. Dave on the dance floor says, this reminds me of the belief in medieval times that your soul wandered through the cosmos before materializing. Yeah, quite possibly, yeah. That's the, Robert Flammarion, I think, had... Is it Flammarion? There was some guy who had... Was it like some guy coming out of maybe like a Swedenborgian school had this whole take where your soul like goes to the moon and then goes through Mercury, and it's like, well, the souls of people who are skeptical come from Mercury, and then from Venus, and then people from Mars, and all of these different things. It was kind of weird. Sorry, I'm just going off on a tangent, but Dave just reminded me of that. That just came to my mind. Anyway, I gotta stick back on topic. So this is important here, because it's like your planetary body is made, or it's fed with the first being food. So people who don't know the being foods, first being food is literally just food that you eat. So cheeseburgers, steak, all of that stuff, even liquids technically form that part. But, everything that you eat normally. Your second being food is air, you're breathing. And then third being food is impressions themselves. And once again, there can be different qualities. So for being food, you can eat a good steak with a nice wine. Nice, fatty Wagyu steak. Got to get that. got to get that stuff going. Or you can eat a bag of chips and you're not going to get much out of that first being food. Same with second being food. You can just breathe normally, or you can do deep pranic breaths. And it gives you, you get more out of it. What is it? I think Gurdjieff has that whole thing where he says, imagine if breath has, or in air, there's 18 parts. And when you breathe, only 6 of those 18 parts remain in you when you breathe out. But there are techniques to extract all of those parts, or more of those parts, not just the 6th. So it's not that he's saying there is 6 and 18 parts or anything like that. He's just using that as a thing. It's like we only breathe 1/3 of the energy, ambient energy around us into ourselves. Whereas different breathing techniques, or focusing on the breath, attention, breathing properly, may increase the quality of that second being food. And then, of course, impressions. You can have a neutral impression, just looking at a blank piece of paper does nothing, or you can look at, great and royal art, or, the sublime, like a beautiful sunset is a good impression, and then, I don't know, watching, I don't know, doom scrolling on the internet is probably a bad impression, or just bad being food of the third type. So yeah, so being food. So the planetary body is fed primarily off of the first being food, whereas your favorite sacred fruit. But the substances needed both for coating and for perfecting higher being body enter into their common presence, as they say, breathing through certain what are called breathing and through certain what are called pores of their skin. So pore breathing, baby. Everyone get out their editions of Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barden and read the pore breathing part. But this is interesting. This is pore breathing is whole body breathing. And it's interesting. Breath, once again, animal magnetism, FAR 96, the Kesgen body, and breathing are all connected. All of these concepts are connected together. Our Kesgen body and planetary rays are also connected together once again, because it's the mixture of the 7 planetary rays. So there's planetary rays. There's something in the air. There are qualities. There's it's not just air. It's not just oxygen. There is ambient energy around you, which you are absorbing through your breath and your skin at all times. And maybe through the skin, it's all clogged and we wear clothes and we're not really absorbing it properly. And once again, our breathing is shallow and it sucks. But with pranic breathing, a pranic breath is just you breathe in and you hold. There's a hold between the inhale and the exhale. That's just what a pranic breath is. So a deep breath with a hold and a proper, understanding of pore breathing or full body breathing. Filling in not just the top of the lungs, but the bottom of the lungs as well. That is going to initiate a different quality in us. Very interesting. So, and the sacred cosmic substances required for the coating of the highest being body, which sacred being part of theirs, as I have already told you, they call soul, can be assimilated correspondingly, transformed and coated in them, just as in us, exclusively only from the process of what is called Turasnian contemplation. Hey, I got that good. That sounded good. That sounded good, bro. I got that. Got that in one. Actualized in the common presence by the cognized intention on the part of their spiritualized independent parts. Although you will be able thoroughly to understand about all those cosmic substances with which the 3 independent being bodies are coated and perfected, in the common presences of your favorites, only when, as I have already promised, I shall relate to you in general about the chief cosmic... Let me just read that again. Although you will be able to thoroughly understand about all those cosmic substances with which the 3 independent being bodies are coated and perfected in the common presences of your favorites, only when, as I have already promised, I shall relate to you in general about the chief cosmic fundamental laws of world creation and world existence. Nevertheless, for a fuller elucidation of our present theme, it is now necessary to explain a little about the changed form of actualization in the common presences of your favorites, of the second being food automatically taken in them. So air, okay, breath. Not just air, breath, pneuma. Ruach, for what my namesake is. Ah, yes. So this is interesting, although cosmic substances in your favorites, in their common presences. So we need to have this crystallized, not in us automatically, subconsciously. We want it in our common presences. We want to be aware of it. A true initiate has a higher being body, knows they have a higher being body, and even perhaps may be able to use it. They have the skill. Maybe that's what an adept is. But anyway, very interesting. So, at the beginning, after the destruction of the organ Kundabatha, when they, like all the other three-brained beings of our great universe, also began to have a full Tamnian existence, this second being food was normally transformed, and all the fundamental elements proper to it, those which arise from the transformation of their own planet, and those which flow into their atmosphere from the transformation in other concentrations of their solar system, were assimilated by their common presence according to the definite data already present in them. And the superfluity of certain of its component elements not used by individual beings automatically passed, as in us, into the possession of the surrounding meritorious beings similar to them. So this is interesting. What he's saying here is, back in the day, we used to transform these impressions, this being food properly. Our second being food was assimilated into us according to our being data. And, then we released the Askoken. Our environment proceeded properly. But I was going to say something about this. God damn. Let me just read that again. Transformation of their planet. Yes, which rise. This second being food was normally transformed, and the fundamental elements proper to it, which arise from the transformation of their own planet, and those which flow into the atmosphere from the So the second being food is, it seems to be, it's interesting. When I read second being food, when I've read, like Ouspensky, he really only talks about breath, and maybe he talks about the solar influences, but it really seems to be that there are solar planetary influences in the breath. Like, we're so conditioned nowadays and taught that it's like, when you breathe, it's just oxygen. It's like, no, the second being food is a concept that does include the literal air and oxygen, but it is the solar forces and extraplanetary forces that are also extracted from that. It's extracted through the breath. And it's really interesting, I should mention as well. I really recommend a study of In Search of the Miraculous and those chapters on the hydrogens, because he kind of alludes to here, we transformed all of these things properly. When we learn about the being foods and the transformation of them, one of the things we learn is, in normal people, only the food line is, in normal modern day people with our consequence of the Kundabatha organ, and we're all asleep and have false consciousness, only the food line actually transforms all the way and has a complete octave. The upper two being foods don't transform, they just kind of stagnate. So it's like the air line and the impression line, the second and the third being food, don't actually transform in a normal person. And it's the top line, the third being food, the impressions, is important, of course, for transforming that soul, that higher, those extra higher being bodies, but this Kesdjan body, which we're trying to create the Kesdjan body. It needs second being food properly. It doesn't need, once again, I'm still die hard on it. It needs the, it needs the exohari, it needs the vril, it needs the sexual energy, so you need to maintain that and be balanced. But it does need this second being food, this breath. One thing that's interesting about the hydrogen lines, though, is The complete octave of the hydrogens, this may not mean much to you, but they all have a density, and the density is displayed by a number. And the most refined number, so a dense hydrogen has a big number, like, hydrogen, what is it, 768? And a really light hydrogen, animal magnetism is Fa 96, allegedly. So here's the thing. The first being food transforms to a hydrogen 12. That is the most refined hydrogen that a human has, and it's in the sexual center. That's the sexual energy. That's creates new life. The other being foods don't transform to that density in a normal person, but if they do the work, if they self-observe, self-remember, well, not self-observe, sorry, if they self-remember properly, or if they pranic breathing, maybe they can strike these other hydrogen lines and actually get them to start transforming again. And you can get more hydrogen 12, which is very interesting, because there's also lines in some other books. I remember one where it says, like, an initiate should have 3 times as much energy as a normal person. I remember being like, well, as in, like, they run track and they're just really energetic? What does that mean? It's like, no, an initiate having 3 times as much energy as a normal person is an initiate who has all being foods transforming in them properly will have 3 times as much 12 hydrogens in them as a normal person. But it's not just that. There's this thing that Ouspensky mentions. It's not the first being food and it's not the third being food. The second being food, for there are reasons that are too deep to go in now, it doesn't actually stop at the 12 hydrogen. It's in the second being food actually refines and you get a 6 hydrogen. You get a hydrogen. You get a type of energy that normal people do not have. And I think there's a bit where Ouspensky or Gurdjieff mentions the cylinders that we talk about, the intellectual cylinder, emotional cylinder, and the motor instinctual cylinder. These cylinders also kind of run off energies. But you also have your higher functions, your higher cylinders. One of the things about the higher cylinders is they need to run off their own particular energy. They also run off hydrogens. What hydrogen do they run off? Only the 6 hydrogen. So a normal person in their life maybe automatically, unconsciously creates enough 6 hydrogen by accident to have a spiritual experience once. But this is also what we're kind of doing. And even then, it's their own higher functions triggering, which is so abstract from them and so odd to them that they extrapolate it as something else. And that's where people will say, like, I was in a really dark place and then an angel came to me. I heard the voice of God. It's like, no, it was just your own higher functionings guiding you. But it's such an abstract kind of functioning of yourself that your automatic being existence can't accept that it's a part of you, and so it extrapolates it as an external being. And so it's really interesting that he's saying this. The transformations used to proceed in humanity, like at one point, we were just triggering that second being food normally. So every single person on the face of the planet had a hydrogen 6 developing in them naturally. Maybe not large amounts, but they potentially, every single person, had the higher cylinder functioning more or less, or connected to it more on and off than modern day humans have, which is they don't do it at all. They don't have it at all. Modern day humans, a normal human has no connection to their higher functions whatsoever. Anyway, so bit of a long tangent there. I've just felt the need to mention that because I was like, that's really interesting. Anyway, let's move on because I rambled heaps. Blah, blah, blah. But later, when, as I have already said, most of them began to exist in a way unbecoming to 3-brained beings. Great nature was constrained to change their full-as-nit amnian principle. There we go. Full-as-nit amnian existence into an existence according to the principle of itoklanos. So that's when our lifespan was shortened. And when gradually in the presences of most of them, those definite crystallizations foreseen by great nature, which crystallizations are the most important part of the composition of the second being food, and which when assimilated by beings are transformed into substances for the coating and for the further perfecting of their higher body kesgen ceased, owing to their abnormal being existence to be assimilated either consciously or automatically for the purpose indicated, then in consequence of this, and also because the afflux of these substances transformed in other concentrations and getting into the atmospheres of the planets, continued all the time to flow into the atmosphere of your planet. The result was that on this ill-fated planet, among your unfortunate favorites, there arose still another definite disease, which has already become quite definite in its harmful action upon them. Very interesting. Let's see where this goes. Let's see what this... So it also implies that just in ancient times, when we were still not close to the animal kingdom, but when that ladder rung was more up and we were still under the full-ass nit amnion principle, and we were still triggering that second being food properly and getting hydrogen 6, most people not only had connection to their higher cylinders, their higher functions, they were naturally obtaining objective being reason just by living automatically, but the Kesgen body was probably crystallizing in them just naturally as well. Whereas nowadays we get none of that, and we have to like cultivate esoteric knowledge and an esoteric praxis to try and crystallize a Kesgen body so that when we die, we're not just dissolved into the memories of nature. So let's see what this disease is that he just mentioned. The point is that no being up for their predetermined purpose, the said definite cosmic crystallizations become, during certain displacements of their atmosphere, concentrated in certain of their atmospheric strata, and entering into them from time to time, dependently on various external surrounding conditions and also on the inner state of the common presences of your favorites. This is a bit of a paragraph, which, by the way, arising in them chiefly from the form of their mutual relationship, just into them, as into apparatuses foreseen by nature, in general, for the transformation of cosmic substances needed for serving the aims of the most great general Trogo-Auto-Egocrat, and not meeting their substrata, corresponding to the requirements of the lawful process of Jatklom, he's bringing back all the old words. That is, these cosmic crystallizations, during their subsequent free completed evolutions or involutions for passing into other crystallizations proper to this planet, and before completing their transformations produce upon planetary bodies, thanks already to other accidental factors, that action by which such a mentioned specific disease newly arisen there is characterized. Okay. Here it is opportune to notice that such a disease, there having a specific cause, was named differently by your favorites at different times on different parts of the surface of their planet, and the contemporary beings likewise name it differently, and also wiseacre differently regarding the explanations of its cause. From among the great number of names of this disease of theirs, the most widely spread there are present as gripe, influenza, Spanish influenza, not allowed to say Spanish influenza anymore, dengue, and others. Dylan says in the chat, talking about drow. What's up with the drow? Where does that connect? They live underground, yeah. The dark elves of the Germanic poetry. What about the drow? I don't follow, Dylan. Explain yourself. As regards... So he's talking about the Spanish flu. So this disease, the Spanish flu, has arisen in us because we don't breathe properly anymore as a race, or as a species, as all of humanity. That's interesting. Well, and amongst other things, we don't create the Kesgen body. Does that mean people of the Kesgen body are immune to the Spanish flu? That's an interesting idea. As regards the introduction into themselves of the second kind of being food, which continues among beings even still up to now, then since they lost the possibility of existing according to the Fulas Nit-Amnian principle, certain of the ingredients of the substances of the second being food continue to serve only for assisting the transformation of the first being food and for removing from the planetary body certain elements already used by them. Dark elves control hydrogen. Okay, Dylan. Now then, now, my boy, let us speak further about a principal, particular psychic property of your favorites and about my activities at that time among them in the capacity of a physician specialist. When I acted upon them by means of this particular psychic property of theirs, through this hypnotism, or as they prefer to say, this branch of their science, arose and became official only recently. Yet it had already had time to become for them another of the very serious... So this isn't Mesmer's time, remember. This is when hypnotism first arose as a science and spread across the planet of the Earth, and then it was lost through war. I believe, yeah, this is, once again, post-Atlanteus, but still prehistory. Hypnotism was a known science. So, another of the very serious factors which brought about a still greater confusion of their psyche, already muddled enough without this in the majority of them, and which still further deranged the functioning of their planetary body. After I had become a professional, namely a physician hypnotist, I grew a little interested also in this official science of theirs, so that when I later made my usual researches concerning various serious questions, as for instance, the investigations concerning the results of the activities of the very saintly Ashiata Shayamash, and chanced to come across something bearing upon questions of this branch of their science, I elucidated my reason. Also, this misunderstanding question there. Okay, that's interesting. Wait a second. Let me just... So that when I later made my usual researches concerning very serious questions, as for instance, the investigations concerning the results of the activities Ashiata Shayamash, so something containing the results of Ashiata Shayamash, and he chanced across something bearing upon questions upon... So it's an interesting... The teachings of Ashiata Shayamash and mesmerism, this animal magnetism, hypnotism, are not the same thing. But remember, Gurdjieff says, if only they didn't, destroy, Mesmer's science, his reputation, and they actually, moved it forward as a science, there was a chance that it would have reversed the, been able to dissolve the effects of the Kunda buffer. And that's what Ashiata Shayamash was doing. So even though it's not the same thing, there is a relation between those two things. Very interesting. Pardon me. As the automatic impelling causes, which have become their usual for contemporary beings, for the revival also of such a branch of their contemporary science, were exceedingly peculiar, and even as they themselves would say, piquant facts, it will, in my opinion, be very interesting to tell you a little more in detail also about this said revival. As automatic impelling causes which have become their usual for contemporary beings for the revival also of such a branch of their contemporary science were exceedingly peculiar, and even as they themselves would say, piquant facts. Okay. But the main thing here is revival. Although contemporary learned beings there affirmed that the beginning of this branch of their science was made by a certain English professor named Braid, and that it was developed by the French professor Charcot, yet in reality this was not so at all. My detailed investigations of this said question, by the way, it became also clear that the former, Brad, had unmistakable signs of the properties of a Hasnamusen, and the latter, Charcot, had the typical properties of a mama's darling. And terrestrial types of this kind, particularly the contemporary ones, can never discover anything quite new. Evil cannot create, it can only warp. And indeed, It appeared that this matter proceeded there in the following way. A certain Italian abbot... Sorry, hold on. And indeed it appeared... Okay. So now we're just randomly going on to what an Italian abbot, Pedrini, was doing. By name was in his town what is called a confessor for a convent. To this abbot, there often for confession a nun named Ephrosinia. Interesting. I bet they bang. From the stories told about her, it seems that she frequently fell into a certain particular state, and while in this state, she displayed manifestations unusual for her environment. During confession, I bet she confessed, she complained to the abbot Pedrini that at times she was unmistakably under the influence of diabolical suggestions. Everything she herself said, the stories circulated about her, interested the abbot Pedrini, and he became very desirous of convincing himself personally about them. You gotta get in there, Pedrini. Once during confession, he tried by all possible means to evoke frankness in this nun, and when he got to know, among other things, that this nun novice had a lover, oh yeah, who had once given her his portrait framed in a very beautiful frame, and that she permitted herself periods of resting from her prayers to admire this picture of her sweetheart. So she was edging. She was doing some edging. And that, as it seemed to her, the diabolical suggestion proceeded in her, just at these said periods of her resting. So this nun was basically edging, and then the diabolical voice in her was like, goon. This is interesting as well. He's talking about hypnotism, and he's saying it came from these two guys which studied an Italian confessor that got a confession of what this nun who had... clearly this is going to be hypnotic. So she goes into a hypnotic stupor, but what is the trigger for it? The trigger for it is weird sexual repression. So this, once again, is another exiohari, another sexual hint, a little vril sprinkled in here. Whenever the sex gets me, hey, another guy's in the chat, hey. Whenever there's something here, there's always a little, everyone likes to hide it, but there's always a little something, a little sprinkle. So let's keep that in mind. This, what was her name? Ephronesia, she's edging and gooning, and she needs help to stop. I've got an addiction. All this told frankly by the nun still further excited the interest of the abbot Pedrini. I bet he was excited. And decided at all costs, to find out the cause of it. And with this aim in view, he first of all asked the nun Ephrosinia to be sure to bring with her to the next confession the portrait of her sweetheart together with the frame. I wonder if it's just like, and it was a blank portrait. Oh my god, no. At the next confession, so she's basically, this nun is the modern, she is the ancient equivalent of, the modern day girls that hate real life men, but they're not lesbians, they just watch too much anime, and they just like fake dudes. So she has a husbando, like, framed on her wall that she just projects onto. Oh no. Another guy says I'm data bound, so I won't be able to hang with you guys. Have a good live stream. Oh no. Very well, another guy. Have a good time. Good night. Thanks for popping in. Dylan says stop being poor. Anyway. So let's see what this freaking weeb nun, what this weeb nun brings in. So there was nothing very special about it, but the frame indeed was unusual. It being all encrusted with mother-of-pearl and various coloured stones. Huh, that's interesting. Because there's that, once again, magnetism. This is the, there's something about, once again, stones also think of like planetary correspondences. Maybe she was unintentionally doing some kind of planetary ritual. and it was absorbing that, because that was the whole thing with the planetary correspondences is those things that you see, different incenses, different flowers on your altar, different stones to use in rituals, they correspond to those planetary energies because like attracts like. So you have that on, you have like, if you want to work with Mars, you have a red, something like a red flower on your altar with a ruby, maybe iron ore as well. You know, you put up some red curtains, use a red candle. All of that stuff, like attracts like. The energy, the ambient energy, the solar force of Mars is attracted, and then when you do that ritual, it has a more potent effect. So I wonder if it's like the frame of the picture has these gems on it, and that attracts certain cosmic rays. And then because she's a nun, she's very passive, impressionable. You know, she's sitting down and looking at her lover and falling into a rested repose. She's unintentionally doing some kind of magic, and it's like putting her into a different state of consciousness. While the abbot and the nun were together examining, bet they were examining together, the portrait in the frame, mother of pearl equal moon, exactly. The frame, the abbot suddenly noticed that something peculiar began to proceed with the nun. First she became pale, and for a certain time she became, as it were, petrified, and then there began with her, on the spot, precisely in all details, the same manifestations which proceed there among the newly married at what is called the first night. She gooned right in front of him. After all this, Abbot Pedrini desired still more, to make clear to himself all the causes of such an unusual manifestation. He just wants to, like, walk into a town square and, like, make women goon just with a look. But as regards the nun, she recovered 2 hours after that was quite a goon session. The first goonette, everybody, was this nun, Erifacina. And it was discovered that she knew and remembered nothing of what happened to her. Oh my god. This is like the, you know... is this like this Beelzebub's Tales needs to get uploaded onto like N-Hentai and then just like give it the mind break category. As the Abbot Pedrini himself alone could not unravel this phenomenon, he turned to help to his acquaintance, certain Dr. Bambini. Italian names are so funny, lol. Well then, the Abbot Pedrini told everything in detail to the Dr. Bambini. The latter also became very much interested, and from then on, they both began to occupy themselves with the elucidation of it all. They first made various elucidating experiments upon the nun Euphrosinia herself, poor girl, and after several they're called seances, they noticed that this nun invariably fell into such a peculiar state of hers only when her gaze rested rather a long time on one of the brilliant coloured stones, on what is called a Persian turquoise, ooh baby, which was among the adornments of the frame of the portrait. But later, when this same Persian turquoise they continued to make their elucidating experiments upon, others, they soon became categorically convinced, firstly, that in almost any one of the three-brained beings without distinction of sex who gaze for a long time at shining and brilliant objects of a certain kind, there begins to proceed a similar state to one which proceeded with the first subject of their experiment. So this is like crystal gazing has its inception here. Scrying and crystal gazing. And secondly, they noticed further that the form of manifestation of the subject during the state varies and is found to be dependent on the former being experiences, which chanced to be predominant, and on the shining objects, which a connection was accidentally established during such experiences of theirs. Well, my boy, when the information concerning such observations, deductions, and experiments of these two beings belonging to the community Italy were spread among the contemporary learned beings of new formation, and many of these later also began wiseacring about it, and finally, when by chance, as it usually happens among them, they learned that it is possible, in beings similar to them, when in this state, to change in an accelerated way the impressions formerly fixed in them to new ones. then certain of them began to use this particular psychic property inherent in them for the purpose of curing. So magnetic healing comes from this. And from then on, such a means of curing was called by them hypnotic cure. And those beings who were occupied with this means of curing, physician hypnotists, the question as to what this state of theirs is and why it obtains in them remains an open one for them even up till now, and reply to it they cannot. What? The question as to what this state of theirs is, oh yeah, and why it obtains in them remains an open one for them even up till now, and reply to it they cannot. So they study the hypnotic state, but they don't actually understand it. And they use the hypnotic state. So it's the same with like electricity. Scientists use electricity, but they don't know the actual nature of electricity. Very interesting. From that time on, there began to appear, and there exist till now, hundreds of every possible kind of theory, and thousands of thick books devoted to this question, thanks to which the minds of the ordinary three-brained beings of this ill-fated planet, already sufficiently muddled without this, become still muddled. This branch of their science has perhaps come to be for them more maleficent than the fantastic inventions of the ancient Hellenic fishermen and for the contemporary beings of the community of Germany. Yeah, so that's one problem with hypnosis, is nowadays it's become maleficent. It's just become for a way to control people, advertising. But also, there are people who have weird mind break hypnosis fantasies. It's like, I want to learn hypnosis to control people. That desire, that impulse, anyone who wants to learn hypnosis just to have cool influence, or they're fascinated by the influence they can have on people, that person, well, they may not be a Hasnamusian, but that's a Hasnamusian trait right there. Straight up, straight up. And so it's really ironic. Mesmer's science could have cured the Kundabuffer, but it's now become something maleficent that people with Hasnamusian tendencies usually learn. So thanks merely to this branch of their science, there was acquired in the psyche of the ordinary beings of this ill-fated planet several still new forms of what are called being Kalkali. So I think that's a phrase to Kalki, meaning Kalki Avatar, meaning the end times, the Kali Yuga. So this is I'm guessing this is going to be like people in the Kali Yuga have Kali Yuga-esque personality traits. Or what do you say? Or essential strivings, which became cast into the form of definite teachings, or not, existing there under the name of ancholisms, Darwinisms, anthropomorphisms, theosophisms, and many other names under names also ending in isms, thanks to which even those two data of their presences, which still helped them to be at least a little as it is becoming to three-centered beings to be, finally disappeared in them. And this essential data, which have until recently been in them, engendered in them the being impulses they called patriarchality and religiousness. This branch of their contemporary science was the cause not only of the acquiring of their common presences of several further new maleficent Kalkali, but it was also the cause of the derangement in many of them of the without this abnormal functioning of their psyche, which to their great misfortune was already long before this disharmonized up to the degree of what is called Al-Nukuharian cacophony. So we're so disharmonious and we just keep getting more dysfunctional as time goes on. Gooners know more about morning wood than carpenters, says Dylan. Yeah. You will understand this well if I tell you that during that curing practice of mine, when I later again became a physician hypnotist, there and existed, mostly on the continent called Europe and on other countries situated near to it, almost half of my patients consisted of those who were ill only because of this said maleficent science of theirs, which had become widely spread there. Yeah, so I think nowadays the term it's changed, and we should make a differentiation between hypnosis and hypnotherapy. People who want to become a hypnotherapist, they're probably more normal, less dysfunctional than people who say, it's almost like a Freudian, like they don't realize if they say, I want to learn hypnosis, there's something behind that where it's like, I want to learn to control people. Whereas if someone says, you know what, I'd like to learn hypnotherapy, there's actually a more impulse to like, I want to heal people behind it. And whether they're conscious of it or not is interesting, but it's those two terms that you see in interplay there in modern times. And this was obtained because when these learned beings of new formation began writing various books about these questions with every kind of fantastic theory, many ordinary beings there began to read them and became crazy with their fantasies. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to hypnotize my boss and get a promotion. And themselves began trying to evoke this hypnotic state in each other, and as a result, they brought themselves to the point of becoming my patients. Among such patients of mine were the wives of husbands who, having chanced to read these books, wished to suggest to their wives their egoistic wishes. Hey, honey. I'm not going to say anything. For similar reasons, children of unreasonable parents became my patients. Various men who were found to be under the orders, or as it is said there, under the thumb of their mistresses, and so forth. Simps. And all this only thanks to the fact that these sorry learned beings of new formation cooked up their Hasnamusian theories concerning this distressing state of theirs. None of the theories now current among them concerning this question of hypnotism even approximate in the least to reality. Yeah, so if you want to find that science that can help dissolve the Kundabuffer organ, hypnotism isn't going to do it. You're going to have to go back and like find old publications of animal magnetism specifically. Yeah, most recently, by the way, when I was on this ill-fated planet, a new maleficent means began to flourish there for doing the same with the psyche of the beings there, as there did, and still does, this branch of their science, hypnotism. And this new maleficent means they call psychoanalysis. Oh, baby. So a little phenomenology, now let's go psychoanalysis. You must without fail also know that when beings of... Tim Sim says, thank you, RR. No problem, Tim Sim. Thank you for coming. You must without fail also know that when beings of the period of the Ticlamishinian civilization constated for the first time about this particular psychic property of theirs, and soon made it clear that by its means they could destroy each other's certain properties, particularly unbecoming to be in them, then the process of itself of bringing someone into this state began to be regarded by them as a sacred process and was performed only in their temples before the congregation. So maybe this is like where channelism trance states became a thing. But in the presences of your contemporary favorites, not only does there absolutely not arise in any being impulse of contrition about this essential property of theirs, and not only do they not consider its concentrated manifestation intentionally yet unavoidably evoked by them as sacred, but they have already adapted it, the process itself, and the accidentally obtained results for serving them as a means of tickling certain consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer firmly fixed in them. Yeah, exactly. They become fascinated with the control they can have. So that's interesting. In the ancient times, when it spread across the world, it eventually became sacredized. So being put in a state of hypnosis was seen as sacred, so you wouldn't violate it. But nowadays, it's just like, let's see if I can get someone into a state of hypnosis, and then we can make them do. Then we can make them do things. We can make them do things silly and film them, put it on TikTok, and become famous. For instance, even when they meet together for one or another established patriarchal ritual, like a wedding, baptism, Saint's Day, and so on, one of the great diversions is trying to bring one another into the said state. It is lucky that they still do not know, and it must be hoped that they never will know, other methods besides the one discovered by the beings of the community of Italy, the Abbot Pedrini and the Dr. Bambini, namely the gazing at shining brilliant objects, by means of which method, as I have already told you, certain of them can indeed be brought into such a mentioned concentrated state. So this is interesting. There are other methods to achieve this state or produce it in another. But, well, maybe we've discovered some of those ways since Gurdjieff has gone, but at the time it was mainly staring at shiny objects that do it. But yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting. And that's the end of that chapter. So we're going to get him. So we've had this explanation of hypnosis and hand-blood zoid and higher being bodies. Next chapter, we'll actually get some stories of him using it and the hilarious psychological tales that come out of that. So that was a bit of a long one today, guys. Whew. 2 hours, almost 2:30. 2 hours and 30 minutes, jeez. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for staying along. Thank you for coming. We'll call it there. Oh my God, Tyler dropping a 20. Thank you, sir. Looking forward to next week. Thank you, Tyler, always. And thank you, once again, thank you everyone else. If you want to help out, you can donate like Tyler. I've got a PayPal as well. You can subscribe to the Ko-fi account. And yeah, see y'all next week.